Now that's a fun, amazing myth. But for someone to say, oh, you know the story of the death and resurrection of Adam is obviously borrowed from, or Christians borrowed that from, is not to give the facts honestly. He becomes an evergreen tree, and that's a late dating myth. By the way, the images of death and resurrection are universal. They are imprinted upon nature. The daily death and resurrection of the sun, the cycles, the death and resurrection of the seasons, going through winter, the crops, etc., that God has imprinted that. If there is a God, he's imprinted that on nature. His thumbprint is there, death and resurrection cycle. So the images of death and resurrection are woven throughout all religious mythology, all religious history. But it is revealed in ways that are distinctly different to, not similar to, the story of God himself becoming one of us and then redeeming creation by not just transmuting into something else and not just spiritually moving into the afterlife, but bodily resurrecting to redeem all of creation and give us hope for the future. That's a distinctly different story, although it gathers up the themes that are imprinted upon all aspects of human life. Osiris. Osiris was killed by his brother. Well, you heard that Osiris crucified, died, was resurrected. That's just, it's not true. Osiris was killed by his brother, who chopped him into 14 pieces, spread them around the world. Isis, his sister and wife, recovered the pieces, all but one anyway, buried them, after which Osiris became the lord of the underworld. He dies, he doesn't, his body's not resurrected, the pieces are buried, and his spirit goes down into the underworld, and he actually sets up shop and takes over. Right? But that's an afterworld life, which we see in all religions. It's not a resurrection. It's not even a resuscitation. It doesn't even qualify as zombification. I would settle for that. It's none of the above. Completely spiritual. Oh, life after death mythology. Yes, that's around the globe. Not resurrection. Mithras, a Persian deity. The Persian deity dates from before Jesus, but we have no record of the Mithras story penetrating the Roman-occupied world, the known Roman world, until after Christianity is well underway. Late first century is the first written reference, and then it's silent again until mid-second century, and then Mithraism really picks up in the 3rd century. As Christianity is flourishing, Mithraism within the Roman world is kind of flourishing at the same time. So although the myth predates, doesn't really come to the known Roman world, to 1st century Israel, etc., until 2nd century and 3rd century. Having said that, whether it was there or not, the parallels just aren't there. And I'm scratching my head trying to figure out what motivates people to say that they are. There's a typo here, the 2nd sentence of the Mithras point. Do you see there is no evidence, for instance, that Mithraism had not spread to Pompeii? The no and the not cancel each other out. I didn't mean that. I was just in an apparently very negative mood, quite frustrated. My underwear was in a knot as I was working on this. So it should say, there is no evidence, for instance, that Mithraism had spread to Pompeii. Cross out the not. Or you could cross out the no and say there's evidence that it had not, either way. But there's no evidence, for instance, that Mithraism, I think I originally had that Mithraism had not spread to Pompeii. I was going to make one of those confident, conclusive statements the way they do in these books and movies, and I thought, no, let's back off, let's just allow the facts to speak for themselves. There's no evidence that it had spread to Pompeii by 79, when Vesuvius erupted, as Christianity had. There's lots of evidence that a number of people in Pompeii were Christians, were practicing Christians by that time. Mithraism was slow to enter that culture and comes after Christianity rather than before. That's the point. But let's just look at the parallels anyway. It's claimed regularly and repeatedly that Mithras was born of a virgin. It is just known that Mithras was born from a rock. And not really even born. He emerged from a rock as a fully formed man. Pulled himself out of a rock. All right, if the rock had not had sex, you could call it a virgin. But that's just stupid. And some versions of say he was born of a virgin and attended by shepherds. Really? Well, yes, in the Mithras myth, he pulls himself out of a rock and he gets stuck, and some nearby shepherds come and help pull him out. After which point they sacrifice an animal to him, and etc. And I say, wow, shepherds were there at his birth. No, shepherds were in the wilderness because at the time, shepherds are the only people who make a living hanging out in the wilderness. If you're going to have anything happen in the wilderness, guess who's going to show up? It's shepherds. It's not lawyers, it's not plumbers, it's not anybody else, it's shepherds who happen to be there to pull him out of the rock. Born on December the 25th, actually, the early Mithras legend has no birth date, just as the early Christ story has no birth date. They didn't know either. But under Roman rule, as both Christianity and Mithraism were integrating into Roman society, because of the December 25th being the date when celebrating the birth of the Roman sun god, both Christianity and Mithraism at the same time were aligned with December the 25th. Now you're talking about late Roman politics, but you're not talking about one religion copying another religion in its original stories. So it's amazing that that just gets said as though it's a fact. 12 disciples? No, there's just no mention of 12 disciples. He does have 4 disciples. They're all different kinds of animals that follow him around. And there's one artifact, actually, is pictured in that clip. One artifact that pictures Mithras dying on a cross, which also isn't in the early stories of Mithras. Seems to be copycat in reverse. That's like dated from about the 300s. That artifact, no one ever mentions that. It's as though it's something that predates Christianity. That artifact is dated from about the 300s. We dealt with this in the pagan Christ, with Mithras being crucified and surrounded by the 12 signs of the zodiac. And which is, again, more pagan symbolism. God bless him. But people read into that, well, they represent the 12 disciples of Mithras. That's just not the case. And Jesus chose 12 disciples not because of the 12 signs of the zodiac, but because of, why? He's reconstituting Israel. The 12 tribes of Israel become the symbolism Jesus uses. Sometimes we forget that Jesus actually does have a great symbolic root system that he can use. It's called Judaism. It's not like there are just a bunch of Gentiles wandering around saying, well, we want to make something that's rich in symbolism. We'll pick a bit of this, pick a bit of that, don't know what to. You had first century Jews who are saying this is how Jesus communicated to us out of our Jewish root system. And many of these writers, anyway, not all, but many of them seem to forget the Jewish root system in the symbology that helps us understand Jesus. Okay, this one burns my britches. He died for the sins of others. Mithras died for the sins of others. Not even close. There's no record of Mithras giving his life for the sins of others. Here's what Mithras did. He slaughtered a bull for the sins of others. That's the same animal sacrifice, the killing of an animal to get forgiveness, that is replete in all pagan religion that Jesus came to do away with. That's the point. At that time, that's not unique, and it's nothing that Christianity borrowed from. Both within Judaism and within all forms of paganism, animal sacrifice for the forgiveness of sins was a regular occurrence. And Jesus did away with that once and for all through the story of God himself absorbing sin, becoming the sacrifice, so that all religious hoop jumping to get forgiveness of your sin is done away with. Mithras is part of the religious hoop jumping. Jesus, the gospel, liberates us from that. Not even close. What about baptism? He encouraged baptism? No. The Mithras sect copied the Attis sect, which would baptize themselves. Baptism is a bit of a stretch. Would wash themselves in the blood of the bulls they sacrificed in order to get cleansing for their sin. Again, not a Christian parallel any way, shape, or form. In fact, in the Attic cult, Attis cult, they would dig a pit that was person-sized, and the initiate, the person who was becoming a convert, would get into the pit. They'd cover the top of the pit with a grate, a metal grate. Then they'd bring the bull over the grate, and they would slaughter the bull on the grate, allowing the blood to come down into the pit and wash over the initiate. And that was how the initiate could get forgiveness for their sins and join the particular sect for worship.